Welcome, everyone, to the B2B C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we've got a super interesting guest and a super interesting topic. As a guest, we have on Aleassa Schambers. Now, Aleassa, you are a well-seasoned B2B CMO. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is how do we capitalize on our most important competitive advantage as B2B C-suite individuals, because we all have our functional roles as CMOs and marketing, but we're also a C-suite executive, right? We have a responsibility for planning and growing the business into the future. So that positions us in a very important role, and you have some very unique perspectives on that. But you're a builder. Like during COVID, you built furniture, which is a great idea. What a great idea. So your role as a builder inside of the organization is what we're going to talk about today. But here's what I'd love to do. Before we get into that, if you wouldn't mind just explaining a little bit more about your background before we get started.
Sure. Well, first off, thank you for having me, Steve. I'm excited to be here. And I love your analogy of being a builder at home and being a builder at work. So thank you for that. So background, I spent a good decade in PR and comms. And what I always loved about that role, getting to the building element of it, is marketing and PR sit at this really interesting crossroads of an organization, right? So you get to see what sales is doing, what programming or product is doing, and you have a lot of insight on a lot of different things. And I think that gives us a very unique perspective, which gets into our topic today around customer experience. So I spent a lot of time in comms and then saw opportunities to get into other areas based on where I was sitting. So I eventually owned the sales enablement function. I moved into broader marketing and have been leading marketing for the last 10 years or so.
Well, fantastic. I want to ask you some pretty pointed questions about leading marketing.
Sure.
So,
okay.
First, though, you talked about right there, this changing landscape. You talked about CX, and McKinsey came out last year with a big report, and they had studied the companies that were the most profitable, had the largest return to shareholders, and they found that the number one differentiator in those companies was CX, was competitive, right? The customer experience. So
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about this shift in competitive advantage. And as a CMO, how do you see that impacting the organization and the role in what you do?
Sure. So it's really interesting in the sense of, I think intuitively everybody in marketing knows that customer experience can be a differentiator. In and above, let's say you have the most compelling competitive solution on the marketplace. It just adds another layer of differentiation and stand out in the market, right? But if you are in a really crowded space where there's a lot of competitors doing very similar things, and as a marketing person, I've been in that situation where you're trying to desperately carve out what's that one piece that really stands out in the marketplace and is going to grab the customer's attention or the prospect's attention. I'm not going to say easy way, but it's a very unique way to stand out, because there's someone sitting, even if you have a great product, let's say, there's someone sitting in another room saying, I'm going to one-up you, I'm going to disrupt you in some fashion. But CX is really hard to disrupt. That's got the human element and the way that you service people and the capabilities that they get at the end of it. And that's what they remember more than anything else.
Absolutely. The analogy I like is that, like, when we hire somebody for our own team, right? What they look like on paper, what they promise that they can do is lots of times very different than the actual experience of working with them as a team member, right?
Right.
Hiring a company is the exact same way. Right. What we all say we can do. And when we all have today, there's on average around 20, 25 competitors in every market. So everybody's going to say they do it. Right. And if they don't really, they're scrambling to make sure that they can. ChatGPT writing code and different things, like technology and product innovations is so accessible to everybody. It's just not something we can hang our hat on long term. But CX is.
Yes.
Tell me, if you wouldn't mind, tell me a little bit about the role of marketing in CX and how that creates differentiation, specifically like brand differentiation.
So two things come to mind in terms of where marketing sits in the customer experience space. One, we are the people that are at the very forefront of promising whatever experience we're going to deliver to the prospect, right? The most trusted solution or the most complete solution or the combination of complete and trusted, whatever it might be. And then the other piece I mentioned earlier when I was talking about how I've expanded my role over time, marketing also sits in a really interesting place in the business where we see a lot of what's going on in the whole essentially customer lifecycle. So from acquisition to closed won to customer to renewal and maybe hopefully upsell, cross sell. So marketing has a really interesting position and obligation to support that customer experience and to hold other people in the organization accountable for delivering on that promise.
So doesn't that make you really the chief competitive advantage officer?
I love that idea because I do think, yes, I like to think of it a little bit as the chief promise officer or the chief advocate officer. It was interesting. I was talking to one of my former bosses recently, who's an expert in customer experience, but he also led sales at the organization I was at. And I was asking him in preparation for this candidly about, does he think most CMOs or CROs think about the customer experience and their responsibility and owning it and advocating for it and being that chief promise officer? And his perspective was most of the time, no. They're generally pointing their fingers at, hey, so and so, you're letting us down. I'm trying to sell somebody and the experience is not great, or we're not getting this renewal because the account team has not delivered at a level of service expectation for the client and so on. So I don't think a lot of people think about it, but it's such an important part of the role. And because of where we sit, we have a unique opportunity to help deliver on it.
It's interesting because as C-suite executives, we have functional responsibilities. CMOs, marketing, right? CROs, typically sales, right? So, and then customer success is all about customer support and answering questions and helping to cross-sell and upsell existing customers. Where does CX sit? If it's not the CMO that's thinking about it primarily, or the CRO or head of customer success, who's doing that?
Right. I think that's the question. And I think a lot of time, purely speaking from a CMO standpoint, when you're sitting at that C-suite, I've seen a lot of articles about CMOs in particular have imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Do I have the permission to sit here? Do I have a permission to say stuff that maybe is outside the realm you were talking about of your functional role? I think while it's hard, and I've struggled with this myself in all candor, right? To say, look, I'm sitting here, I can't get client references because we're not doing a good job of delivering on the product. Sales is mad at me because I'm not delivering enough leads to them because people aren't happy with the product. And so we're not putting great content out. You do have that responsibility and you do have that permission.
Yes.
To say, look, I can't do my job because the rest of the people in the business. Just saying that marketing purely owns that probably isn't fair, but there should be at that C-suite level. I think what sometimes is missing is complete alignment on what do we want that customer promise to be? And then how are we going to deliver on it? Whether it's finance and the way that they bill or invoice clients, the way the customer experience team operates, technical support,
Yep.
sales, whatever it might be. Marketing, because of our skill sets, right, can help people get aligned on what does that experience look like? Who's responsible for what? How do we engage employees in that responsibility and that promise and make sure that they're connecting the dots on the impact that they can have? While it may not solely fall to a CMO's shoulders, they certainly have the ability and the accountability or the ability to hold others accountable for that capability and that delivery.
Absolutely. In fact, I had another CMO on and he said, oh, and by the way, before I make that point, that imposter syndrome from CMOs is very real. I've talked to all kinds of CMOs on this podcast that have said, we have to really earn our seat at the table. And the way most of them are looking at it is if they can understand the customer better than anyone in the organization, that's the voice of highest authority. That deep understanding not only gives you a seat at the table, but it gives you an authoritative voice at the table. And the only way to create a great experience for your customers is to know your customers better than anyone else. And that's where this CMO, he said, in fact, that's our competitive advantage. He said, if I can understand my customers better than my competition, I will create a better experience for them.
Yes. Yes. I love that.
Isn't that
It's
great?
hard sometimes, though, but it's absolutely right. And sometimes there's perspective of marketing, you're stepping out of your zone. Stay away. I got this. You don't need to be talking to the customers. Product is managing those interactions. And you're like, no, 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 wait a minute. So I totally agree. Sometimes it's more difficult in some environments, but
Well, the
it's
thing is,
definitely
customer success or product, they're talking to the customers about what? About our product. They're
right.
not talking to them about their total challenges that they have in the industry. They're not talking to them about the trends. Sales, Gong came out with a study that said 2/3 to 3/4 of the time on a call is spent with the rep talking. And that's after analyzing thousands and thousands and thousands of sales calls. And when
Yes.
they aren't talking, the prospect is reflecting on what they were talking about, which is about us. So recorded sales calls are really great information. They are
Yes.
not replacement for deeply understanding your ICP and your customer. Product conversations, customer success conversations. It's why most CMOs, in their playbook, when they start up, they start calling customers and they say, that's the only way to have a totally unencumbered, deep conversation about them and their challenges, what they need to get done. If the CMO has those kinds of insights, it's deeper and more realistic than any other part of the organization, which contributes to our familiarity with our ICP, but not our deep understanding of our ICP.
Yes. Yes. You're absolutely right. And again, it's been something that I've struggled with over the years too, just getting to how do I get to those clients or customers? How can I have the permission from different account owners? That's always been a challenge, right? Like, don't be talking to my client without me type of thing. So I don't know if maybe that's just me. Others have suffered from that, but it's been an interesting conundrum over the years. But when you do get to talk to them, it's very eye-opening and so helpful.
So how do you translate that? So let's take it now. We know we have to be doing that. And by the way, we have to be doing that on a regular basis because our ICP is complex and always changing. Right? So it's not like something we do, we get done, and now we're on to the next project, right? This is an ongoing part of the business.
Yes.
How do we align internal teams? Here's another stat. It's incredible. Only 16% of marketing and sales departments are aligned on the definition of their ICP, let alone what are the deep needs of their ICP, right? So how do you align teams? How do you bring them together? Because I think you made a point in one of our other conversations that customer experience isn't a job for marketing, it's everyone's job. So everyone has to contribute to this. That's a big job.
It is a big job. Candidly, it helps when you have the data, right? It's probably different depending on the stage of growth you are at as an organization. So as a startup, you're just scrambling, you're just trying to go, right? And get something, anything. But when you get to that point where you feel like we should be moving the needle more and we're not, then you have to take that step back and say, okay, is it marketing? Is it the messaging? Is it the brand? Is it we're not converting? Is it we get the conversions, but we don't get the renewals? And so when you have some of that data to start to go to the leadership team, or you start with sales to say, hey, look, I want to help you. We're not moving the needle where we want. I've dug into marketing. This is what I think. What do you think? So you start to have that as a dialogue. And if you can say, look, you're not getting renewals. Can we dig into why we're not getting renewals? Let's look at the overall customer experience. What are they saying? Why are they saying this? What is the feedback that we're getting? And then I think you broaden it out. Beyond that, several of you have alignment, whether it's the CX person and the salesperson and the marketing leaders, right? And then you take it to the C-suite and say, we think we need to reassess this. Let's get everybody aligned there. Are we agreed on what we want to be delivering? That customer promise that we made 2 years ago doesn't seem to be panning out. This is where the gaps are. And then you get alignment on that. And then you hopefully then start to broaden it out to the rest of the business to say, okay, we need to have a conversation with the whole business. And this is what we're changing. This is why we're changing. This is how you can help us change. This is your role and your impact on it. So I think it starts in those like baby steps, and then it moves into a big boulder rolling down the hill, so to speak. And you start to pick up speed over time because you're engaging more and more people in it.
You're finding pain points in different departments
Right.
and problems that they can't solve. And you're saying, hey, let's solve that for you. You're coming
Right.
at it from the perspective of, we're going to help you. We're going to do it by understanding our buyer and the experience we're creating and how we're differentiating ourselves.
Yes.
So,
And one thing I should add to that too, you were talking about the calls early on to understand the ICP, those calls after the fact to the client you lost, to the prospect that didn't buy. And then you start to hear their stories, right? Why didn't we renew with you? This is where the gaps were. So again, that goes back to the data or the anecdotal data, right? To say this is what's not working.
that's the painful insights to get.
Right.
But so important, so important.
Yes.
So I want to ask you a question about, there's this B2B self-service buyer's journey, right? Where they're waiting longer and longer to talk to us. And when they do, they've already picked a winner. Like, I think just recently, 6 Sense came out with a study and they said 81% of B2B buyers, by the time they talk to us, have already picked a winner.
Yeah.
So in this kind of a self-service journey, how does CX play a role in that?
Yes. So one of the things, as I was thinking about this leading up to this conversation, is it's heavily around building trust, right? As an organization. And the trust doesn't always have to mean you're delivering a really high-end, high-quality product. It could be very transactional, right? Like the person goes online, signs up for your offering, they never talk to anyone, but they're trusting that you're delivering a great product. And so that looks different, obviously, depending on the industry, but it translates in case studies and client endorsements or customer endorsements. It looks like content that says, I understand your pain point and I have a really unique or different way to solve that problem for you. And you can trust me, and here's why. And so your marketing has a lot of responsibility, especially in that self-service environment, because you're setting up all of the elements that build that trust. The website looks credible. It has great client logos on it. You're putting out great content that uniquely solves the problem, or you have your experts out in the marketplace doing webinars talking about that, or you're partnering with really credible other organizations to do joint whatever content presentations, you name it. So I think that's where, in that environment, marketing is probably even more increasingly important.
Yeah, forever there's been the notion of the trust mark, right? A brand is a trust. If we don't have trust, what do we have? There was a study that came out earlier this year called the Trust Gap, and it literally said that 74% of B2B buyers don't trust the customer evidence we present to them. Ouch. Fade out.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up. I don't know if you're familiar with the Edelman Trust Index. Same thing. Like, I've been watching that for the last 10 years or so. I don't know how long they've been doing it, but somewhere in that range. And the trust in so many different areas is going so low, right? And ironically, they do trust business leaders and some elements of it. So if you get that trust and clients feel, again, that builds that loyalty, it builds that customer experience. So maybe all of this boils down to trust.
When my wife and I got married, we said, if we don't have trust in our relationship, we don't have anything. I think that defines relationships in general. And our relationships with our customers and our prospects, when they make a decision to buy us, lots of times that's a big risk for them. That's a big decision. There's a lot of emotions that go into that. If they don't trust the partner, so in this day and age of trust is on a free fall, right? How do we do that? And if we can build a customer experience, and then I had another CMO, she's a 3-time B2B CMO, said literally, she said, the best campaigns are the campaigns where the voice of our customer leads our voice, right? We're very proud of what we do. We're very proud of our opinions. The bottom line is we are a sales organization. We're a product organization. We're a service organization. We're a sales organization. It validates everything if we can have our customer voice preceding ours. And that's their peer community,
hmm
right? That's where we go to. That's word of mouth. So it's got to be a good way to do that.
Yes. Well, it's funny, not in a good, funny way, ironically sad, funny way, is when I started out in PR, getting case studies and press releases, oh, we just won this contract, was so much easier. And now it's nearly, I'm not going to say impossible. That's not great. It's very difficult
Yes.
to get clients for a variety of reasons, especially if you're at like a Fortune 500 or they're traded on the stock exchange. They don't want to say anything
Right.
that could potentially disrupt their stock price, which I get. So it's made it increasingly harder, but you're right. And that's the piece that more people are likely to buy, right? Because they know there's a trusted voice, there's someone that's endorsing the capability or the product. And then the other thing I was going to say to that as you were talking is we know as marketing leaders how many times we've been burnt by an agency, a tool, or whatever. And you start to find, like, I have a handful of vendors, agencies, or whatever that I use over and over and over again because I know they're going to do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
And the minute you buy one and you're burnt, you're automatically, unfortunately, skeptical of that next solution or vendor or whatever, because you're just like, I don't know if I'm going to get what I was promised.
See that, I think you just so eloquently said it so simply. The CX is really down to, I'm going to get what I think I bought, what I was told. Like,
Right.
do I actually get that? Is that actually what happens? Because we've all been burned. So another way to build trust is leveraging our own employees, right? Building the employee experience, how that translates into the customer experience. I said before, and it's like the whole VC private equity industry, they invest in people first, ideas second.
Mm-hmm.
That always amazed me when that first happened. I'm like, what do you mean? Without good ideas, where are you going to go? I'm like, yeah, obviously you have to have a good idea, right? But the best of ideas, without the right team, without the right people, go nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on bridging the employee experience and the employees and the customer experience as a differentiator.
Yes. So this is an area I'm very passionate about. I had worked at a company for 10 years and all we talked about was change management, employee engagement, and customer experience. So that's where a lot of these philosophies and approaches came from. And what really hit home for me is that so many times leaders say, here's the strategy, now go execute. But they don't give the employee the chance to really connect the dots on how do I, in my role, either as the frontline person or a manager in finance, help execute on the strategy. So the employees are so critical to this. And it starts with having them understand what are the outcomes we're trying to do or achieve. What is my role in it? How does my manager help me do this? So what's the manager's job in connecting the employee's role to that? And then empowering those employees to go off and do it. Many times, especially on the front line in these retail or hospitality type environments, these frontline employees are giving very
Absolutely
narrow guidelines, right? You do this, you don't do this, don't ever do this. But when at my last company, they would dig into what were the high performing franchises or retail locations or whatever it might be. It's the ones where the managers gave their employees, they empowered them
Yes.
to make good decisions, right? Like you might have guardrails. Like we don't want you going crazy and refunding every single client's whatever, but you have the authority to make exceptions or to do this and this and this. And so I think it's giving people that permission to say, your job is to help us deliver on this customer experience that we're promising to people. The other part of that is making the emotional connection. So it's very easy to just say, hey, we're helping customers. Let's say it's a CRM solution. We're helping customers input their client data and track their sales performance over time. And sometimes that doesn't really mean anything. And I know that I'm not always the most EQ person out there. So that's something I have to work on all the time. And in a lot of environments, you just don't make that emotional connection. So yes, maybe we're helping people input numbers into a software solution, but it's helping them stay in business, which is keeping jobs, which could be your cousin, it could be your aunt, it could be your whatever, or you're keeping someone safe. The organization that I was CMO at last was focused on risk intelligence. And that had really meaningful impact, because if these companies using the solution didn't get the data, it could harm someone.
Right.
Truly. So it's like making those emotional connections of, if you do your job, even though it's so far away from the client, it could still have amazing, measurable impact on that client's customers. So it's making those connections for people that's so important.
And you make those connections and you give them those motivations. And there's lots of studies out there that show happy employees meet happy customers.
Yes.
Happy customers means more loyalty, less churn, higher NRR scores, right? Revenue goes up, everybody's happy.
Yes.
So this idea of CX and delivering it by everybody in the organization and focusing on the employee. Like, I don't know the last time I talked to a CMO that said, we really have to have a customer engagement plan. And that's really important part of our go-to-market strategy.
Yes.
So that's a huge thing that I'm taking away from what you just said there.
Yes.
Is that a good takeaway?
And 100%. And I'll be perfectly candid. I don't know, as a CMO, I've ever fully thought it through in this fashion, right? I think inherently when you have conversations like, we're not delivering on whatever we promised, but I don't know that I ever fully realized I need to take ownership of this too, until like we literally started talking about it. And I'm like, you're right. In every marketing strategy, there should be a customer engagement strategy built in there. And who do we need to support that? And who do we need to engage in that, build it out and get alignment and so on. So for me, this has been hugely valuable.
Well, I think there's going to be some HR leaders that are doing cartwheels, backflips too.
Right. I'm sure they're like, hallelujah, finally.
So this lends itself into an area that I want to ask. The differences in showcasing CX in B2B and in a B2C setting. And what do you think are the differences and what we should be learning?
I think as a consumer, because I've never worked in B2C, so I've never marketed or owned a CX sort of engagement in that environment. But as a consumer, I know, and as a consumer, like as marketing, which we were talking about, and buying different things, that interaction with a human makes a big difference, right? And it's that sort of immediacy or recency. There's a theory around like you only remember the most recent thing. I forget exactly what it's called, but that's what leaves the impression on you, that last interaction. And whether that's B2C or B2B, it's exactly the same in my mind, right? You walk into the store and maybe 8 times out of 10, you've had a really great experience with that barista or that salesperson or whatever. And then that last one left you a really bad taste in your mouth. You're going to rethink whether you're going to go back to that store or that coffee shop or whatever it might be. I think B2B is exactly the same. You might have a great account manager on your first go round with that product, and then that person leaves because they get hired away because they're so phenomenal, right? And then you get a new account manager and it's night and day. And you're like, oh, I love this product, but this person is not helpful. They're not supportive. It might be whatever. And that's going to make you rethink it, even though you had a great experience prior to that. And so I think, one, CX is not something that you can just go, here's your engagement strategy, go. You have to constantly be looking at it, and you have to constantly be focused on improving it or watching the competition to see what they're doing, because if they start to do something very different, it's going to start to undermine your business. So I think it's all the same in that sense between B2B and B2C.
Well, I've got one last question for you.
Okay.
This is sometimes the hardest, and you only get one answer. You ready?
Okay. Yes.
If I were to say, we've talked about a lot, what is the one takeaway that you want people to have watching this episode? If there was one most important thing you wanted them to take away.
Sure. And it's the same one that we just talked about. For me, this is easy in the sense of marketing has much more responsibility and ownership of the customer experience than I think most people realize. And for me, it's the biggest takeaway to say, I need to do more as this level leader to take on responsibility for that.
I think that's a great, and thank you for keeping it to one. I've had CMOs and CROs do about 5.
It is hard sometimes, or I could have gone for 3. I like the odd numbers, but yes,
Well,
nailed it in 1.
I know there's going to be people that have questions after watching the episode.
Yes.
Would it be appropriate if we handed out your link to your LinkedIn profile so people can get a hold of you?
Absolutely. That would be great. And I'm looking for my next opportunity. I'm just finishing up my last project. So if anyone has any ideas or things they'd like me to look into, let me know.
Well, fantastic. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your insights and wisdom that you learned over your number of years.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.